Okay, cool. So,
Our mind map of design system is actually getting somewhere. It's looking good.
yeah.
We started off with this FigJam file to kind of outline our ideas around design system, make some notes, and kind of try to draw a path, hopefully eventually making to like an illustration of it. Like
Hmm?
I'm missing the word for it. So it's like when we have um, infographic.
Yeah.
It would be nice to make an infographic out of this sort of mind map they were building around design systems. We also started outlining some how to's that we think would be worth having, like just generic topics eventually for us to come up with some content around it, I would say. And nice. What else? We also went down the path of like one of the points from design system is the fact that we need to choose for the right tool, and there are things to take into account when choosing it. Also from a designer's perspective. So I started like using these stamps of stars for designers and the thumbs up for developers. Because I guess as we are talking through these things, you're bringing up the dev side of the design system, and I'll try to bring up the design side of it. And I think we ended up in quite a nice note around change log discussion, right? Do you remember what we were saying about, well, the design system change log?
Yeah, we were thinking of is it a good idea to have um, uh, to integrate the changelog into the design system? Do the design system has to handle the way we publish the changes that occurred in the application? Because just writing changelog by extracting the commit messages is not really relevant for a lot of people, but having a way in our design system to power the changelog and to explain what changes are introduced into the design system, then into the application by itself. Um, Maybe a good use case of the design system by so so yeah, there's probably a lot of things to do with it.
Yeah. But do you think it's a general practice in the development world to try to make changelog a bit more readable than just commit messages? That there is like
Mm,
a technical writer dedicated towards setting up like a readable changelog?
yeah, that's a good question because change logs are usually for developers rather than final users. But we've got really great examples of uh, changelog contents like the ones that were produced by the Trendline team at first, before they were bought by the Trendline company in UK. But
Mm.
they did really great stuff with that. So because the messages were not just okay, we updated this part and this new component is here, and now you can fill with that kind of filters, or I don't know. But it was more user stories oriented. We had this new use case, and we introduced those changes, all of those changes, because it finally served this use case and this user story specifically. So, but maybe I'm totally wrong, and the design system can't handle the changelog side. But I have the intuition that there is something to do with that.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's that difference between changelog and release notes as well, right?
Mm.
So the release notes is the one that gets to be more well written, but indeed incorporating like in the process of design system implementation, the writing of the changelog and the interpretation of that to
Mm.
release. Well, we get into an important um, thing from design systems, which is versioning of it.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, and I'm not even sure where would I start to write this down, because we're going down the path of like, okay, you start learning about it, and then you sort of start building it. When you start set it up, you have to define some principles. And yeah, I guess this is here, right? So what are the principles of versioning? Where will you start defining, or how are you going to start looking at your design system from a versioning perspective? I'm going to try to put it around here somewhere. And of course, if we're talking about the code alone, it's easier. There's already quite some frameworks to follow out there, or methodologies. But have you worked with anything on design system related that handles versioning for both designers and developers before?
I guess that from the development side, there were existing tools that help us a lot to version the different assets that comes from the design. I'm thinking of a tool named GitLFS, which is a way to version binary files into a Git tree. So you could.
What's the name again?
GitLFS. Yeah, that's it. Which is a virtual file system for Git.
Right.
Which is a nice way to put your binary files, like, I don't know, not vectors, because vectors are text files, but I don't know, extract, PDF, PSDs, directly into the repository, so along the code. But I guess that the main idea behind it is to have at the same place both design content, documentation content, and code. So finally, this is what we're doing in Backlight with the design tab, where you could add some links to the pointing to the Figma stuff. But either way, how do you version your contents on the design side?
Yeah, that's the funny part. From my experience previously, what we had was we were using Sketch that had the design system library, and we tried to version that library. So that meant that every time that we would make a change to one of the components, we would have to up the version. And if it was a minor change, so we try to keep it similar to what was happening in development. But that is also assuming that you release that library to your customers. In our case, it was the designers in the company. And I think because they were never too hung up on versions like that, it didn't really matter to them. They weren't even looking which version they were in. But also the fact that you can't really revert it back to a version as such meant it was kind of pointless to try to number these things. And we were using another application to store the files, which was called Abstract. So it sort of puts it on the cloud. And once you make a change, so you would branch out with Abstract, similar Git workflow, and then merge it back to master. But that workflow did not require a numbering of sorts, or it did not have some kind of validation that would say, oh, this has changed, therefore you should, do a minor or major versioning of your files now. So in the end, because we also had like a second level of users to our library that were not just the R&D designers, but our designers that were working with the clients, they really needed to know which version of the kit matched that version of the developed components. But at one point, it just went like this way, because we continued numbering it each time that we had to release our kit, and the development continued numbering each time that there was a change in the code and that they had to release the code. But you can never go back and say like, oh, version 5.6.3 of the kit matches version 4.2.28 of the developed components. So, and as the design system team, we also try to have like the design system version, right? So this is design system 1.2.0. But that meant, oh, the theme had a specific version, the coded component had another one, the kit had another one. So then how do you merge all these things together? So I think eventually we gave up on trying to version the design system as a product. Because there was the documentation side, the code side, and the design side. But I would say it is important in the process of thinking about design system to at least have a position, right? So we do version or we don't. In the code, I guess you have no way around it. You have to version code, right? Because if there is a bug introduced, you need to be able to like tackle the bug and make a fix and direct people towards like getting that version of your library. But in design, like the applications like Figma or Sketch, they will recognize if you just touch the element, you didn't even change the rectangle or didn't even modify any style of it, but you just like selected with your mouse and then unselected it. Most likely that the software will recognize that something changed. So you can try to rely on the software to say like what has changed for you, and that's how you base your the level of update that you're going to do, like if it's minor or major. But it's very tricky to say, because if you're only touching it and not doing any change to it, then it shouldn't really count, right?
Yeah.
So I would say approach to design for versioning. I'm not sure. Like maybe there is some content out there on the web that makes or that gives a suggestion on how to go about versioning your designs, but I would say it's not clear in the industry. I'll just write that down.
Finally, I guess we've got the same problem with on the development side, just because we often do not just freeze the code at some point, or this is exactly what we're trying to do with the publish process with the tags, saying this is the version 1.2.3 and this version is just a patch of this minor version, this major version. But the way we're working with our versioning system are just, we are branching and merging to the master, so the master is constantly evolving, and we need at some point to fix, to freeze the content and say, okay, this is stable enough to be released. But there is different approaches. Do we want to release a whole UI kit with every element in it, or do we prefer to release a few packages that are separated, but the packages started to have different version, and sometimes you have things that sounds a bit weird, like what the Angular stuff. Angular team is releasing different packages, so you've got the core, you've got the compiler, you've got any related stuff, so you can just pick the one you want to use, but they all share the same version at some point. So you've got 20 packages, but they are all aligned in the version number. So it's good enough because you don't have to have in mind, okay, I can use this version of the component with this version of the component, but not this one. But on the other side, you just bring 20 different packages that could be just packaged in just one. So
how to go about it, right?
Yeah,
there's definitely, I mean, I guess what's interesting that we could do right now is indeed point out the difficulties around versioning, which I could, one of the things that I grasped from what you just said was like the freezing of the content. it's quite difficult from a designer's perspective. Is how the design files are tracked, and also the matching of the different aspects of the design system all together. Because that's the problem, right? So the same thing as you're referring to in the Angular approach, the different packages, it's pretty much the same thing, right? If our users of the design system see it as one product, like this company's design system, it means you have to think of the tokens, like, are they going to be versioned on their own? Like, when do you introduce new tokens that are eventually translating to a variable for the theme? But how are you going to keep track of that, right? The addition of new tokens or fixing of tokens or like renaming of them. So that's like one little part, and then you have the component itself, the Angular code, and you need to update packages, and that's going to interfere again. And especially, making addition of new components, I guess that's an easy way to track the change and add to the number. But if you need to redo something, fix something, that's where it gets tricky. So I think one approach for documentation that we have tried before was if there were any new components added to the design system, that's basically a consequence of updating the documentation of the design system. Therefore, we needed to version it as well. So really just seeing the documentation as the thing that includes both the design and development. So that's already bringing the design system over those two areas closer together. So maybe design can move forward independently than development for a bit, but everything is brought together by documentation, right? I only did it when design and development have new additions with or fixes, I would say. And that's when you start looking at the versioning of your documentation of the design system. And that kind of impacts the contribution as well, right? So if you have a big design system team, you need to have some like decided factors on how do people contribute. And then I have a question for you, because I'll have my own opinion about this, which is, who do you think should suggest a component first? A designer or a developer?
It's a trap.
It is, isn't it?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because design comes before the code, but the code is what we're shipping to our end users. So I agree with people saying that the single source of truth should be the code, because this is what we are developing and testing and shipping to the final users. But this is not the origins of our design system. The origin started in the design tools, and so maybe the design system should start with the design tokens.
Yeah, but let's say, like, the situation is the following. I'm designing an interface, and we have a design system, but there is this one thing that looks like a component to me because I see it, the need to be reused afterwards. And then I need to propose this new component and tell my developers, hey, dear developers, this is coming up in my designs, and therefore we need to make into a coded component as well, for the other developers to benefit from this reusability. So yeah, I would say the origin of most components is from a designer's, but I'm already thinking of like the practical element, right? That one thing that the end user, like the user from the application, like not the end user of the design system, but the end user of the application you're building, is going to interact with. So that final UI element. But yeah, it should start with design tokens, but that's already like going deep into after you defined what the UI element is going to be reused. All right, so let's give an example of a switch button. So that one that goes like on and off. If it doesn't exist in your design system yet and starts showing up, or the designer feels like, hey, it's a trend out there on the UI world and we should have a switch button for this specific interaction, let's add as a component. To define the design token of that switch, you already have to know how the switch is going to look like to start defining tokens there, right? So I wouldn't say start with tokens. I would say it starts with like the idea of what the UI element's going to be in the end.
Yeah, and I agree when you are just creating an interface from scratch, but in the situation where you are working on an existing product and you're improving the interface, improving the UI, at some point you will probably say, okay, here I will add a single switch because it will be easier for the user rather than this checkbox or this existing component. But as as it is an improvement of an existing interface, from the development perspective, we probably already have something that is working like a switch, acting like a switch, even if it's not already a switch.
Right.
And this is not just transforming its UI, and probably extracting it from the views that already containing it, but the switch is probably already here. So
then you would say that's when it's important, or that's maybe when it would start from development and not from design, because the functionality is there. So the developer would be able to also give an input on what they should do in the interface, because the function of switching on and off is already there.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like a switch, but they also would have an input of like, hey guys, this is something that we could improve on, and it's a component.
Yeah. And this is where finally we're trying to improve the communication between designers and developers by allowing developers to give feedbacks to the designer, saying, hey, I've got this thing, but isn't it more interesting if it's a switch, because it acts like a switch and it looks like a switch, so it's probably a switch. And
but still, then when we come to the style of this new component, it will certainly start in the design, right? So the designer will have to go back to the drawing board and be like, okay, radius around here and more shadow there to make it look nice or pleasant or intuitive.
Yeah, definitely.
And I guess this is an area where I feel that a lot of people struggle with, because the designers don't necessarily know how to approach a developer to say like, hey, I want our switches to start looking like this from now on. So defining the specs of how the component should look like. I mean, you can obviously design it in Figma with rectangles and shadows and hopefully with the usage of the existing tokens that have already been defined in the design system. But from there, like, I feel that a lot of designers get stuck. So like, now how do I hand this over? How do I like request my developers to make this happen? So like, yeah, I think it's quite a big topic around handover, specific to design systems, right?
Yeah.
was I had in handover? Is it one word?
Can't recall.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So handover is kind of like, well, if you define some of the principles, how are you going to go about deciding on these things, like deciding on naming conventions, on the contribution models, then that's why I feel that it comes like afterwards, that it makes sense to go into handover processes and definitions. So, yeah, like I feel that it's almost like when you're setting up a, let me think of a real life example. When you're setting up like a group of friends that you're going to get together, and you define, well, I'm actually setting up a game, right? So you need to define a basic set of rules to go about the game. So that's what I feel that it's like the principles that needs to be defined as the design system is getting set up. Just the set of rules that, of course, you can change later in the game, but just something that helps you guide some decisions, because one of the toughest thing is making decisions in the design system, and they have quite a lot of impact. But at least if you have some like North Pole, not North Star, to base your decisions on, that kind of helps, I think.
And finally, I've got the intuition that we're just playing around the real topic that is finally a way to exchange the information between the different teams, which is finally what documentation is made for.
True.
But we all know that extensively working on documentation before doing everything else is just a nightmare, because no one wants to come with a big Bible of things where nothing is implemented. So it's probably a matter of discipline, something like okay, start to work on this part of the application and this part of the interface, and when we will work on it, you will encounter some kind of behaviors and some kind of common patterns. So feel free to extract them, even if we don't have them in the design system right now, but document what you find, and it will help people that will come after you to just understand, okay, there seems to be a common pattern, there seems to be things that are with, I don't know, repeating
But
patterns.
then you're describing the process of people that are working on the platform, like whatever product they're working on, not necessarily the design system team, right?
Yeah, you're right.
And that's fine. I mean, because that's also the tricky part for us, working so closely with design system, is that we assume that our way of working between ourselves should be also the way of other people's interacting with the design system team or the design system itself. But I would say there are some things that we need to figure out between design and development of design systems. And then that can serve as an example for how other teams can go about development and designing in general. Because in the end, we tend to think very systematically, and that probably helps on the long run for any type of development of applications, right? Because in essence, we are more or less doing exactly what any other product team is doing, except that our product is something that product teams use instead of end users like, grandma and grandpa. So that's where I do like to think of these processes. Like if I talk about the handover of a design system designer to a design system developer, I do think it's worthwhile documenting how to do these things anyway to anybody else, because it's probably a good way to go about things anyway. But I would say we do have to define some handover steps for like me from design system to you, design system developer.
Yeah.
how would we go about it? And I guess, yeah, we can think of all the basic things that define a design system, like, the atomic design, the molecules, organisms. But we could also think about the handover of the tokens, of the definitions of the component itself, like definitions of components. We would have to agree on a few things, so it's not like design will just dump it on the developer's desk. Oh, these are the new tokens. No, I think it needs to be agreed upon between the two parties, but eventually it needs to be outlined somewhere. And I think you could still heavily rely on like the inspect tab from Figma to figure out how that component should look like, or that you would know, it's a 2-pixel border for this button. But I also feel that we are lacking a couple of templates for other design system teams to just use it as like, this is how designers hand over component definitions.
Yeah, I see what I mean.
It's almost like sometimes when you're like trying to come up with a template of an invoice that you're going to invoice your clients, you don't want to like do an invoice that is just like a single line saying, pay me this much. You want to put it like on a nice table with your like letterhead and your address and instructions on how to get the payment. And so you're probably most likely going to go online and be like, invoice templates, or just use something from Excel that, they give it to you, or I don't know, Word has a few ready templates as well. So I feel like we don't have that for documentation or handing over of definitions. I feel that it's something I would like to work on eventually. Like, it's a nice layout and criteria that if you fill it out, it will be easy for the developer to understand.
Yeah, like something like I don't know, a handover toolkit. With
Handover toolkit.
With
right?
Some kinds of common elements, common templates to
Handover toolkit, I like that. I think that there's a couple of examples in the Figma community space for sure, but I think it's easy to find handover of designs in general, right? So when you're setting up a new user flow in your application, and many other designers have done handovers of user flows in general, so you can just base on that. But I feel that maybe we could be working on something for like design systems specific handover toolkit. I'm just going to make it very specific here. Design systems handover toolkit. I wonder what that could look like. But yeah, in essence, a handover is an exchange of information. In this case, information from design to development. And then we also have the handover of the design system to design system users. So between teams, which is what you were touching on before. The coming across something and documenting it in the process of it. But then we just say that should every product team be able to contribute to the design system, or should it be a responsibility of a design system team?
I'm pretty much convinced that collaboration is the key. If you don't allow people to contribute to the content, whatever it is, you will lose them at some point, just because nobody wants just reading stuff and implementing stuff, but we do have to be able to exchange and to contribute.
Yeah.
But it could be something as simple as just having a way to provide feedback to the different teams that are working on the components and the parts.
One thing that I felt with being part of a design system team was sometimes we're just like in support mode all the time. We weren't actually like working on features that we wanted to. So yeah, I do agree that collaboration is key, and sometimes it's like, look, you've noticed that there is a color contrast issue with this text on this input. So go ahead and make a PR for it. Why do you
Yeah.
need to wait for us to provide the ethics and just like dump it in somebody else's plate? It's like, oh no, it's not my problem. It's the design system team's problem. Like, look, the design system belongs to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Maybe it could be something that could be encouraged by a policy of you encounter an issue at some point and you need to fix it. Okay, make your fix, and push it to the rest of you of the team as feedback. Just saying, okay, I quick and dirty fixed it, but that's not nice. But you know that there is an issue here, and here's a quick resolution step, and maybe we could integrate it in a more proper way in the design system.
Yeah, I think I like that suggestion as well. Eventually, what this mind map can result is also lots of little nuggets of tips. Like, oh, you've landed on this path of you wanted, or you found a bug and you wanted to fix. Here's a suggestion on how to go about, like, yeah, how to even incorporate feedback inside your design system workflow. I think I like that suggestion. I wonder if the designer though would be able to do the same, because of course for a developer to identify a bug, it's easier, like they're already in the code. But sometimes the designer has access to the end result of the interface, and it's just doing some sort of like user testing of their own to see how the end product is coming about, and then they see like that there's a contrast issue. They wouldn't be able to actually point it out where in the code that could be fixed, right?
Yeah.
So then how do you raise tickets in that kind of situation? It's like with screenshots and stuff. But yeah, I wonder, because, well, then it's also a more company wide type of solution that you have to make sure you integrate with whatever is happening to the design system. Like, how does the company handle finding bugs and reporting them?
Yeah,
So
on big companies, there is probably QA teams that are dedicated to just tracking bugs
yeah,
and
exactly.
filling issues. But yeah,
Well, it's something to at least to have it listed out. Well, the QA, that gives me another idea. The QA process of design systems.
yeah,
How do we do QA? Because it's like um, learning about it and then defining some principles, then going like design development, so handing over, and then there's like, well, the coding of the design system itself, and then there is a QAing of that
yeah,
development, right? Like system parts, I would say, the making of. Um, I would say, yeah, that's like another big bubble of content, and then the QA after that. Eventually, I want to like trace a line around everything, but it feels like like these bubbles start to show up here and here, and it's getting big.
yeah,
So, well, we started off a little bit later today because we actually had
yeah.
our own team meeting before, but I do have to do some other stuff. So I think maybe we'll just have the session of today for this half hour and
Yeah,
continue next
and
week.
continue next week. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've got a few ideas I have to dig in.
Mm.
yeah, around this issue of just sharing information and sharing content between teams.
Make sure to drop them here,
Yeah.
so we expand on it, like sort of like in a root matter, like the way the root of trees grow.
Yeah.
Just maybe
Something
drop.
organic, but yeah.
Yeah, in a very organic way. So just drop those words of whatever is crossing your mind right now in here, and then we try to like. We have a word in Portuguese for that. Let me see if I can translate it to English. Ramificar. It's like, yeah, well, the branch. I didn't realize it was like the word. So yeah, it's like we're starting to branch out ideas from whatever is in your mind right now.
Yeah, okay. I will add some content on it. Yeah, sure.
Cool. So
Awesome.
we'll see you around then.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time once again.
Yes, always a pleasure.
Yeah, for me too. See you soon.
Take care.